And so I'll start off at the top left here in Washington and then move down to the bottom right corner where Florida is. So starting off with the latest polls in Washington, currently Patty Murray leads by a margin of 10.5% against Tiffany Smiley. This race is slightly competitive as, of course, Patty Murray is currently not expected to win by a solid margin. However, she has led in every single poll released and will very likely win her re-election. 538 currently gives her a 97% chance at winning her fifth full term in office. So Washington is going to be a likely state on our map. Now, moving on to Oregon and California, we do not yet have polls in these two states, but these are two very solid Democratic states, and so Ron Wyden in Oregon and Alex Padilla in California are heavily expected to win their re-elections. We also don't have any new polls from Idaho, but of course it's going to be very solid for the GOP. So moving on to the silver state of Nevada, we do have many polls here. They have all shown Catherine Cortez Masto leading, except for the recent Trafalgar Group poll that has Laxalt up by 2, but overall, Catherine Cortez Masto maintains a 3.8% lead against the failed 2018 Republican gubernatorial candidates. Adam Laxalt currently is not expected to win this election, at least according to what the data is showing us. And with these ratings here, anything from 5 to 15% is going to be likely. Anything over 15% obviously is going to be solid. Between 1 and 5% is a lean rating, and then anything less than 1% means that it is going to be tilt. So moving on to the state of Utah, we actually have some pretty surprising numbers here. Evan McMullen is actually becoming even more competitive against Mike Lee than previously expected. The most recent poll actually shows him leading against the Republican incumbent that won his first term in 2016 by 41%. McMullen is a conservative independent, and so this race is definitely going to be one to watch, but right now, according to the polls, Mike Lee is expected to win by an 8.2% margin, making Utah a lean Republican state. Next up in Arizona, of course, here we have Mark Kelly running for his re-election. Mark Kelly is one of the strongest Democratic incumbents. That's why he's doing so well in this race against Blake Masters. Blake Masters is currently down in the polls by 6.1%. Every single poll released for this election between Blake Masters and Mark Kelly has shown Kelly in the lead over the last 2 years, and so Mark Kelly, firmly elected in 2020, will now obviously be in a very good position to winning his first full term in office. So Arizona is going to be a likely Democratic state according to the latest polls, even more blue than a state like Nevada. And of course, Arizona only flipped for Joe Biden in the 2020 presidential election. Before this, no Democrat had won the state since 1996. In the state of Colorado, we also have Democrats leading here with Michael Bennet as the Democratic incumbent. He's up by 8.6% against Joe Dea. Joe Dea is more of a moderate Republican, definitely not affiliated with the pro-Trump wing of the GOP, and so that's why he's probably not that terrible of a candidate. But still, Michael Bennet, as a Democrat in Colorado, is going to win his re-election to a third full term. He was first appointed in 2009, and then proceeded to win re-election in both 2010 and 2016. So Michael Bennet, a relatively strong incumbent, is going to win his third full term in office alongside Mark Kelly as well. So right now, both of these states are going to be likely for the Democratic Party. And to finish off the western half of the continental U.S., we also have just one poll out of the state of South Dakota showing Don Thune defeating Brian Bangs by 35 percentage points. Definitely a very solid Republican state. 538 currently gives him an over 99% chance at winning his re-election to a second term. So John Thune definitely very solid in South Dakota. He is not going anywhere. And of course, this was a Republican-funded poll, but John Thune won by a margin of 43% in 2016. If he wins by this margin this year, it would actually be an underperformance. So we'll see whether or not John Thune can crack 40%, but definitely South Dakota is going to stay a very solid Republican Senate seat. We also don't have polls from North Dakota, Kansas, or the two races in Oklahoma, but they're all going to be very solid for the Republican Party, as of course they're all states in the very center of the country. Now, in the state of Hawaii, we don't have polls here either, where Brian Schatz is running for re-election, but he's almost guaranteed to win that for the Democratic Party. But in Alaska, we do have quite a few new polls showing Lisa Murkowski slightly ahead of Kelly Tshibaka. Currently, according to the most recent poll released in July, Murkowski maintains a 4-point lead in the final round of ranked choice voting against her Republican opponent. So Alaska is going to be solid for the GOP, as of course both of the top two candidates are currently members of the GOP. And so now moving on to the eastern half of the U.S., we have a lot more polls here to cover, but starting off with Iowa, Chuck Grassley is running to become one of the only members of the Senate that has ever won an 8th term in office. Currently, he leads by 7 points against Michael Franken as he attempts to do so, and this race is probably going to be a lot closer than Senate elections we've seen for Grassley in the last couple of decades. In 2016, he won by a very solid 24-point margin. In 2010, it was a margin of 31%, and then go back to 2004, he won by 42%. So if trends continue, Michael Franken is going to do much better than Democratic nominees in the past against Chuck Grassley. He is a former Navy Vice Admiral. I think that he definitely will be able to sway a lot of former Grassley voters away from the incumbent Republican, but in the end, Chuck Grassley is still probably going to win his re-election, and so as of right now, Iowa is only a likely Republican state, but really it does not really matter too much with the margin Grassley wins by. Moving on to Missouri, we also have another likely Republican state here, with Eric Schmidt defeating Trudy Bush Valentine on average by 9.3% in all the polls we've seen so far. Eric Schmidt has been ahead in all of them and is right now overall in a pretty good position going into his election for a first term in office as he attempts to succeed Republican incumbent Roy Blunt. We do not have polls yet out of Arkansas, but it is going to be very solid for the Republican Party as Tom Cotton runs for re-election to a second term. But moving down to Louisiana, we do have one poll here between Gary Chambers and John Kennedy. Of course, in Louisiana, there are no primaries, and basically every single person runs on the same ballot in November. And then, of course, if nobody reaches a majority, there will be a runoff. But considering how red Louisiana is, John Kennedy is going to pretty easily win this race. He's up by 39 points according to the most recent poll. However, this poll was conducted all the way back in March of this year, but Kennedy is at 53%, which means that he would be able to win without a runoff. Just look at the sheer amount of candidates in this election. John Kennedy currently has a 93% chance at winning this election. So right now, Louisiana is going to be a very solid state for the GOP. And now we're going to go over the Midwestern states here in the Rust Belt first, and then down south to the races that we have in North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. So starting off with Wisconsin, we have a very competitive election here. According to 538, Wisconsin is going to be the closest state of the year. Ron Johnson only has a 51% chance at winning re-election to a third term. Mandela Barnes has a 49% chance at flipping this seat. And just 2 months ago, Ron Johnson had an 80% chance at winning. So Wisconsin, in just the past 2 months, has gone from being likely Republican all the way down to being a pure toss-up. If we look at the polls, currently Mandela Barnes leads by 4.3% and has led in basically every single poll released for this race. So things really are not looking good right now for Ron Johnson. He is in a pretty precarious situation, but I think that in the very end, Ron Johnson still does have a very good chance. He did have a surprise win in 2016 to a second term against former Senator Russ Feingold, but that was 2016. He is much more unpopular than he was 6 years ago, but as of right now, Wisconsin is going to be a lean Democratic state. Of course, Wisconsin is going to be one of those major races to watch, as Democrats could make a surprising upset. In Illinois, Tammy Duckworth is running for re-election. She defeated Republican incumbent Matt Kirk in 2016 by a solid margin, and so at this point, she's pretty much guaranteed to win. According to the poll, she is up by 16 points against Kathy Salvi, her Republican challenger. She's up by 23% according to the most recent poll, and so of course, Illinois is going to be very solid for the Democratic Party, with Tammy Duckworth being a very popular incumbent. Now, in neighboring Indiana, we have one poll, but it shows a much closer race than expected. As of right now, Todd Young only leads by 13% against Thomas McDermott. And Thomas McDermott, I think, is a good candidate for the Democratic Party, but this is still the state of Indiana. Todd Young is still going to end up winning. I think he can win by double digits. I think this 3-point poll is, of course, an outlier. It was conducted by the McDermott campaign themselves, but if you do look at the 2016 election, Todd Young only won by 9.7% against Evan Bayh, but Evan Bayh was a former 2-term senator, so that does explain why Democrats did surprisingly well 6 years ago. But as of right now, Indiana is almost guaranteed to go to the GOP, even though the polls only suggest a lean margin of victory. Next up in Kentucky, we have a poll here as well, with Rand Paul up by 16 points against Charles Booker. Rand Paul also did not win by a solid margin in 2016, only defeating Gray by 14.5 points. But as of right now, Rand Paul is expected to win by a solid margin to a second term in office. He, of course, serves alongside Mitch McConnell, the Senate Minority Leader. And moving on to Ohio, currently Tim Ryan actually leads against J.D. Vance by a margin of 1.9 points. I think this is probably the most surprising state on this map. Tim Ryan is doing surprisingly well. He still has maintained a lead that he first claimed in early July, and so J.D. Vance has really not been that great of a campaigner, but simply because he is a Republican, J.D. Vance still has a very good chance at winning this race. According to the 538 forecast, he still does have a 72% chance at winning his election to a first term to succeed Republican incumbent Rob Portman. So Tim Ryan, even though he's doing so well, he only has a 28% chance of winning. For a Democrat, Tim Ryan is making this election very, very competitive. Republicans are wasting a lot of money in Ohio right now, but in the end, they're still probably going to win. But as of right now, according to the polls, Ohio is a lean Democratic state. And to finish off the Rust Belt, we have the most high-profile Senate race of the year, and that, of course, is the one in the Keystone State of Pennsylvania. John Fetterman is running against Mehmet Oz for a first full term in office. This seat, remember, is currently held by a Republican, that being Pat Toomey, who won re-election in 2016. And Pat Toomey barely won this race. Mehmet Oz is in a very poor position right now. He's down by 8 points in the polls, and John Fetterman, the Lieutenant Governor of Pennsylvania, has led in every single poll conducted for this election. So as of right now, John Fetterman has a very good chance at winning 530. It gives him a 4-5 chance at being elected to the U.S. Senate. And so according to the polls right now, John Fetterman is going to win Pennsylvania by a likely margin. And I think that in the end, he's still probably going to win by less than 5%. But still, John Fetterman is running a very impressive campaign, while Mehmet Oz is really starting to crack. We do not have polls yet out of Maryland, but it's going to be a very solid Democratic state for, of course, Van Hollen, who's running for re-election. Now, moving up north to New York, Chuck Schumer is in a good position here as well. He leads by 20.5 points on average against Joe Pinion, and so as the Senate Majority Leader, he's pretty much guaranteed to win his re-election. Now, Kathy Hochul in the governor race in New York, though, is doing significantly worse. The governor election is going to be much closer, as Lee Zeldin is running a pretty strong campaign, but Chuck Schumer in the Senate election, at least, is going to win re-election very, very easily. And so right now, New York is obviously going to be very solid for the Democratic Party. We also do have one poll out of the state of Vermont that shows a surprisingly close race between Peter Welch and Gerald Mallard. Peter Welch has been the sole representative of Vermont in the U.S. House for the last couple of years, and currently he leads by 7 points according to the most recent poll conducted by the Trafalgar Group. Obviously, Welch is going to win by a solid margin. This is Vermont, the most solid Democratic state in the country, but according to the polls, it's only going to be a likely margin of victory. In New Hampshire, we have Maggie Hassan running for her re-election. She, of course, flipped the state in 2016 when Hillary Clinton only barely won New Hampshire against Donald Trump. And, of course, New Hampshire on the presidential level is much bluer than it is on the Senate level. So New Hampshire is currently expected to vote for Maggie Hassan for a second time. She leads by 6.5 points in the polls. And the primary here in New Hampshire has not even occurred yet. New Hampshire is the only state that we're still waiting on a primary for. But Donald Bordeaux is probably going to win that race, and he leads in every single one of the GOP primary polls. So after New Hampshire, we're not going to see any other primaries for the 2020 election cycle, and Maggie Hassan in the end is still probably going to defeat whoever the Republicans choose to nominate. She currently has an 80% chance at winning her re-election, so according to the polls, New Hampshire is going to be a likely state for the Democrats. And the final state we have left in New England is going to be Connecticut. Here we have the election between Richard Blumenthal and Leora Levy. Leora Levy won the Republican nomination just a couple of weeks ago. It was a surprise win for her, as of course Themis Klarides was expected to win that race for a very long time, but Levy still only has a less than 1% chance at defeating the incumbent Blumenthal. Blumenthal, according to the average of the two polls released, is up by 14%, and the most recent poll is Republican funded. This was funded by the Jim Jordan campaign, and this poll only showed Blumenthal up by 12%, but still a double-digit margin, so Levy really has no chance at winning, and Connecticut is still going to stay blue, even though the polls currently suggest only a likely margin of victory. And now we're finally down to just the 5 states in the southern edge of the country. We do not have polls out of Alabama, though, so it's going to be solid Republican. Katie Britt is going to win that race, no matter who the Democratic nominee is. And so we only have 4 races left. So starting off with North Carolina, Sherry Beasley, surprisingly, has actually taken the lead here, leading by 1.1% against Ted Budd. She has been doing especially well in the most recent polls, and so she is probably still going to lose, but she is doing much better than expected. Ted Budd is definitely underperforming as a candidate, and so as of right now, North Carolina is going to be a lean state for the Democratic Party. I mean, you're seeing so much blue on this map. Basically, every single state that does not have a major coast is currently expected to vote for the Democratic Party. That, of course, is a pattern we're seeing nationwide. But I mean, Democrats leading in North Carolina is still a pretty big deal, a state they failed to capture in Senate and presidential elections over the last decade. In South Carolina, it's going to be very solid for the GOP. Kearsarge Matthews is down by 32 points against Tim Scott. Of course, Lindsey Graham only won by 10% in 2020. It was a pretty small margin considering how red South Carolina is. Jamie Harrison raised more money than any Senate candidate in American history at that point. He was overtaken, though, by Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock in their runoff elections. But South Carolina was a surprisingly competitive race in 2020. We're not going to see the same thing happen again with Tim Scott. Tim Scott is much more popular than Lindsey Graham, and so he's up by 32 points in the polls and is pretty much going to win by a margin like that. In the state of Georgia, we have a very competitive election between Warnock and Walker. Of course, Raphael Warnock is the incumbent Democrat elected in the 2021 special election. Raphael Warnock, though, is probably one of the most vulnerable Democrats on the ballot this year. I think by far the most vulnerable one on the Senate level. And if you look at all of the most recent polls, Herschel Walker is doing much better than before. Even though Warnock led in most of the polls in the summer months, Herschel Walker has taken a slight lead in the most recent polls and is probably going to take the lead if things continue like this. But as of right now, Warnock still maintains a 1-point lead, which means that Georgia is also going to be a lean Democratic state. And now the final state we have left on this map, as we normally do, is the state of Florida. The Sunshine State currently has a Marco Rubio running for re-election, with Val Demings being the Democratic challenger. Of course, Rubio was first elected in 2010 and will now be running for a third term in office. Val Demings, though, is doing surprisingly well in this race. Even though many of the recent polls have been Democratic funded, she is still getting within lean margins, according to many of the most recent surveys. And so right now, I think that Florida may be just more competitive than we previously thought. For a long time, Marco Rubio was expected to win by margins over 10%, but really Val Demings is making this election pretty competitive. It is still Florida, but Florida has been shifting right significantly in the last couple of years. But as of right now, Marco Rubio has an 86% chance of winning with a 7-point margin of victory, according to 538. But according to the polls, Florida is only going to be a lean state. And so this right here is the 2022 Senate map based on every single poll that has been released this year. We have polls from basically every single major race and then from some other smaller races as well. I think there's some pretty surprising numbers on this map. Obviously, this is not my prediction. I don't just go by the polls, but this is just an interesting visual for you guys to look at. Democrats really are doing very, very well according to polling numbers alone. Just look at the 530 forecast based on just the polls. This is a light model of the forecast. They currently have an 80% chance of winning if you only look at polling numbers, and are currently expected to win a total of 52 seats if we only look at polling data. And if you look at the map here, states like Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Georgia are all expected to go to the Democratic candidates. And so right now, this map, I think, is very interesting to look at. Democrats are winning in states like Ohio, North Carolina, Georgia, and even Wisconsin. But in the end, I do not believe that Democrats are going to win many of these races. I don't think they're going to carry Ohio. I don't think they're going to win North Carolina. I think Wisconsin is a little bit of a stretch, and I don't think some of these states for Republicans are going to be as close as polls that say they are. I think Indiana and Florida both have the potential to be likely Republican states that will vote for their candidates by double-digit margins. But as of right now, this is the Senate map based on the latest polls. 45 seats for the Democrats, 46 for the Republicans. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure you like it down below if you enjoyed it. Comment down below which party you think will win more seats in the Senate, and do you trust the polls that are coming out? And how do you feel about Democrats winning 54 seats according to the numbers that we're seeing? Subscribe to my channel if you haven't, and I'll see you guys in the next video.